Hi, I'm Jim Hemphill, features writer for IndieWire, and I'm very excited to introduce this craft roundtable on the art of film editing. We've got a fantastic panel of people here, 7 editors from 7 great movies. Kirk Baxter, who edited House of Dynamite, Affonso Gonçalves, who did Hamnet, Michael Shawver, who did Sinners, Andy Jurgensen from One Battle After Another, Pamela Martin, who edited Springsteen, Deliver Me From Nowhere, Saar Klein, who edited Dead Man's Wire, and Luke Lynch, editor of Black News, Terms and Conditions. All of these movies have very strong directors that you're working with, but in your case, you're working particularly closely with Chloe, the director, because as I understand it, she basically did her own cut before she even brought you on board.
Yeah, Chloe's the co-editor of the, like we edit together. The way Chloe, I think in all her movies, she does the first pass. And this one, we talked about it, she says, I want to cut it, don't watch any footage, don't watch anything. I want you to, when you come in, watch my cut first. I watched the cut, and then we talk on the phone, and we discuss what she had. I think because she's so specific, she's so particular about performance, so she wanted to do the first pass the way it is in the script. And then I came in, and I had a little more freedom to do different things. And then she came back to London, and we started working together. But it was super fun. It was great. It was a great relationship we had in the cutting room.
Well, the performances in that movie were just absolutely incredible. That just feels like a movie that the editorial process must have been so delicate because there's so many silences, there's so many sort of internal moments that the characters are having.
Yeah, and it's a movie that you have to be careful not to rush anything because the silence are important. The time that passes are super important. And I think Chloe sometimes, she likes the wide shots. She has the masters. So sometimes I just go in and then we talk about when to go in. Even going in, try to keep some of the silence that exists in a master, not go in just to keep that way and just kind of play, sometimes even stretch silences and pauses and stuff like that. Also sometimes when to not cut because they're so incredible together and there's covers there, but you can't really use because it's so incredible and powerful and real what's happening in front of the camera on that shot. So I think sometimes, for all of us, the job is actually to know not to cut. Just to let it, exist.
Will you be brave?
Yes.
Will you be brave?
Similarly with Springsteen, Deliver Me From Nowhere, also a very kind of internal journey movie. A lot of that movie is basically a guy alone in a room, which I would think in some ways is very difficult to figure out the rhythms of that and how to cut it.
We had to find the right balance of what was too much, what was too little. It took a lot of trial and error to get it down to the length it needed to be and to keep it compelling and interesting. We knew when we were screening for friends and family, when we finally got the feedback that people really loved the stuff in the house, like a test screening would say, we love this, we knew it was working. We used to have a lot more of Badlands in the film, and it was too much for the film to hold. So yeah, there was a lot of experimentation in that area in particular.
Don't need to be perfect. I just want it to feel right.
Saar, with Dead Man's Wire, you've got an interesting sort of challenge because it's like a compressed time frame, kind of a compressed location. It jumps around a lot, but a lot of it is just this hostage situation. What are the pleasures and what are the challenges of cutting a movie, sort of has those limitations?
I was really scared when I first read the script and realized a lot of the film is just 2 guys in a room. But in a subtle way, I think Gus and the cinematographer changed things around a little bit, so it was visually interesting, and really it was just the performance, spoiler alert, but there is a shotgun involved, so that made it a little bit easier because there's always the threat of death. It was a good challenge, but a lovely thing just because the actors gave so much.
I'm a man that's fighting for everything that he owns, sir.
Luke, with your movie, you're almost like creating this entirely new visual language or something. Well, first of all, your movie didn't even start out as a feature film, right?
It began as an art installation. It was a 2-screen art installation that Khalil Joseph conceived, which was basically his attempt to articulate a version of the news that he would want to watch. And in the process, he kind of challenges sort of whatever notion of what journalism or even kind of news could be. He felt like pretty much any information worth learning or knowing is news. And it's called Black News, and it very, very much is sort of intended to kind of be a, sort of articulating the Black experience in America as sort of a core foundation of what it was interested in studying. And so it was a 2-screen installation, art piece that began in the Underground Museum in Los Angeles and expanded to, actually you were just talking about how you've seen in a cafe you go to in Inglewood, and part of the idea is that it's supposed to be seen in sort of common places, but it also exists in museums. It was part of the Venice Biennale. 95% found footage. They did a couple of days of like a shoot, and everything else is just created in the edit.
Mostly arts and culture. Lately I've been doing a lot of profiles.
The approach for a feature film wasn't really all that different. There are elements that were filmed and scripted, and is dialogue. One of the ways that Khalil's articulated, I think, really well is that if classical cinema sort of is akin to classical music in the process of something that you write, you assemble, and you rehearse, and then you execute, this is sort of jazz. Free form, total break of structure of anything familiar. And so we're pulling from the experience of us loving growing up watching movies and the things that films can do, but sort of going down the more emotional journey of it and how it affects us, abstract nature of storytelling, how you can actually say a lot indirectly. Yeah, it's like approaching that kind of with a blank page and having to just experiment until something starts to kind of take form. But the footage comes from anywhere, which is
and
pretty
could
wild.
continue to come from anywhere.
Yeah, and
What a fucking nightmare.
The way he approached the movie is kind of like an album. He sort of hopes that it gets dissected the way albums do, and he loves the idea of people pausing it and stopping and talking in the movie theater and like kind of just let it flow over you the way you let an album flow over you, and you don't dissect it or articulate or try to understand it, necessarily the same way you would watching a movie. What was it about? What were they going for? Kind of all that kind of stuff.
Well, and now with a movie like Sinners, the possibilities aren't limitless like that. But one of the things I love about that movie is you kind of get all these movies in one. It's like, it's a horror movie, it's a great drama, it's got a love story in it, it's a musical. Depending on where you shift the emphasis, it can be more or less any one of those kind of movies. How many different iterations were there for you as you were going through, and how did you arrive at the final shape?
I think what was new for Ryan and for myself on this was we didn't have sort of a structure to help guide us. Right? Fruitvale Station was the last day in a guy's life. Creed was a Rocky movie. Black Panther was a Marvel movie. So we could talk to those filmmakers. We could watch them for reference. With this, the movie was so personal to Ryan. You can't really put it in a box. So it was really trusting ourselves. It was trying different versions. And Ryan would come in every day with 3-4 different versions of the movie. The first cut was about 3 hours and it worked. And then 2:45 and it worked. 2:30, 2:15. We had a 90-minute version of the cut, which, because as we were test screening, we got the note, get to the vampires faster, get to the vampires faster. But, in this movie, the vampires are not the antagonist. The horror of this movie is actually the lives that they're living and the economic status, the racism that they face, the oppression. And so keeping that overall theme in mind, and elevating those moments with kind of horror tones in the background, or you might hear sound effects as Delta Slim is telling the story of his friend being lynched. And the 90-minute version, it started with them getting to the juke, and it cut out most of the get the gang together part. And at that point I told Ryan I don't want to put my name on this movie, as a joke, but I was also very serious, and it sort of communicated to him like, yeah, okay, we're not going to do this. We realized when you're working on a movie that has such a unique place and a unique existence, this movie or Black Panther, elevating the uniqueness and the things you wouldn't see in other movies is very important. I told him, if I was an audience member and paid my hard-earned money and I was gonna see a gangster movie in the 30s with 2 Michael B. Jordans and some vampires, I wanna enjoy this world, I wanna live in this world. And Ryan did this thing, when something's that personal to you, you might try to hold on to it tighter, but he actually did the opposite. And to all the departments, he let us have more agency in everything, whether it was music or cinematography, and let us kind of lead him in ways, because he admitted, he's like, I might be too close to this. So I really need you to tell me what's in this movie. We got notes from some people that said, take the generational music scene out of the movie. We were never gonna do that. So instead of taking that out, we found ways to make it more digestible to audiences. And that's sort of how the structure of the opening changed, and setting it up with a prologue about, all centered around music and Sammy, so that once we get to that moment, the audience is like, what the fuck, but in a good way. Why is Bootsy Collins in this juke in 1932? It's scary. When I locked this movie, I didn't think I did a good job. And it wasn't until I sat with a crowd at City Walk in at Universal and felt the energy in the room and that people were having an experience.
Y'all ready to drink? Y'all ready to sweat till y'all stink?
One Battle After Another is kind of a similar situation where it's an epic that has action, that's got comedy, that's got these personal stories. And I'm wondering if you had a similar experience in terms of the trial and error, sort of shifting emphasis and sort of changing what kind of movie it was.
Yeah, definitely. We were modulating everything, the humor. There's so much that you have to set up, with the French 75, with their dynamic, with Perfidia. So, and, also with Lockjaw as well. So it was interesting how the beginning evolved, because you also want to kind of let people know it's okay to laugh. And then, of course, like after the prologue, we're going 16 years later, and then it kind of, the tone changes again. But at the core of the story was still like this father-daughter relationship. So that was like always our North Star, was to like keep that intact.
I need to find my daughter.
Well, then call us back when you have the time.
You just
House of Dynamite, that movie is like such a gift in a way to an editor. I mean, a gift and probably a horror, because it's got so many interesting kind of conceits. I mean, the fact that there's like the real-time stuff, the shifting perspectives and all that. I mean, what did you see looming ahead of you as the things that made you most excited and maybe the things you were most afraid of?
It's complex. It was a frightening read because of its content, and it was frightening because I knew it would be challenging, but I read it kind of going, did you write this for me? Like it seemed just like a layup for a film editor, because the whole thing is about, okay, I'm gonna let, as a chef, it's like, let's cook duck 3 ways. It was, let's repeat the same thing with different characters in the same time thing, and the whole movie's about pressure. The idea that this missile's flatlining and heading towards us, regardless of if you're enjoying a character's moment, it's like, oh, you like this bit? We're moving on. You want to know what happens to that person? We're moving on. And it's just that constant push. I love that, love it. And I love the resetting of the clock to then relieve that pressure with the audience still knowing that it's coming, or dropping those little clues of repeated dialogue. And when the hammer drops, again, it's like you don't get a chance to breathe all the way through it. I mean, it was a gift for a film editor, it really was.
Admiral Miller.
That's me.
We need to move you to the POC, sir.
And I'm curious how much you played around with the repetitions. I mean, were there things that weren't repeated in the script that you did repeat, and vice versa?
I repeated a lot more than what was scripted, because I found it so enjoyable to experience the same thing from a new perspective. There were like key phrases, like a bullet with a bullet, I wanted to experience again. Because the way Catherine shot, it was sort of chapterizing things, going, okay, the audience learnt that in chapter 2, so we're going to pick up from that moment in chapter 3 and carry on. It was a sort of graph of time. And I sort of blurred the edges a lot more. Like the president in the helicopter at the end, just before it goes to calling his wife in Africa, when we put that on his face and experienced it again, even though the audience knows every single word that's being said, like it highlights this idea of sole authority. And the words of "I need a minute," when you know he's got 2 minutes to impact, and then you go to Africa and you're watching, elephants, and it's like hello to his wife. It's like, what? You got 2 minutes, dude. So like putting certain things before a scene stopped them feeling languid. I didn't affect the time of what took place in Africa. It was just how it's served up to you.
Really, a lot of these movies, the use of music is so important. I mean, the scores in these movies. Talk a little bit about working with the music and the sound design for your movies. Like, are you working with any of the actual music you're going to be able to use? I know, like, for example, PT has worked with Johnny Greenwood so long. I'm imagining he probably brings him on fairly early in the process.
So one of the things that we do is we actually have daily screenings during the shoot, like at the end of the shoot day, where we're reviewing the footage big. Even then, Paul's getting music from Johnny. Sometimes we're watching footage, and then he'll just plug his phone in to the speakers, and then we'll watch the dailies like with an idea that Johnny has. So we really didn't even cut with any temp music for the movie. We just had so much material.
Pamela, I'm curious what your relationship was to Bruce Springsteen's music before you did this movie. Were you a Springsteen fan, or was it something you acquired the taste for doing this?
I grew up in New York, so I was around at that time, but I was not a huge Bruce Springsteen fan. I was into other music, other types of music. My husband, however, was a big Bruce Springsteen fan, so one of his birthdays, I bought him Bruce's autobiography. And after I read it, I was so taken by his poetry and his story. And I started deep diving on the music then. It was funny enough, a couple of years ago when Bruce went on tour, I said to my husband, I know you've seen him a bunch of times, but I've never seen him. He's a legend. We have to go. So I went to see him. We went to see him perform. And a week later, I got the call to meet Scott Cooper about this job. You know, temping the music in the movie, we had kind of an interesting thing happen where our composer, who we brought on later, Jeremiah Freitz, who's one of the two guys from the Lumineers, he grew up in New Jersey, and he read the book Deliver Me From Nowhere by Warren Zane and was so inspired that he wrote a ton of music, we hadn't even filmed yet. And so I was temping and trying to find the sound, which I do very early on. And our music editor, Jason Reuter, had worked with him on the other movie. He said, yeah, my friend Jeremiah wrote all this music. Here, I'll give you that too. So he gives me a pile of stuff because I was asking for things in a certain sort of sonic world that would complement Bruce's music, but not be in the acoustic guitar world. It had to be a little different. I started slowly putting Jeremiah's music into the movie, and it was amazing how it fit into the film. It was tonally so right. You know, many months later, we ended up bringing him on, and that was an amazing experience, and I think the score is incredible.
So I know that Springsteen was on set a lot and was very heavily involved with the movie. Did he ever come in the editing room? And he did. What was that? What was conversations like?
It was great. I mean, we spent some time with him. He came in a couple of times and talked to us about it, sat in the edit room. In one place, he said, how come you didn't put that joke in? Which was, you know, when Paul Walter Hauser's character says, I love Born in the USA, which he ad-libbed and was one take, and I didn't even think I had it on mic, and it was only in a wide shot. And I was like, well, that moment is golden. Like, you know, while Bruce was in the room, I'm like, let me try it. Let me see if I can make it work. Let me dig out the ISO tracks and get the right mic, see if I can get it loud enough. But it was really amazing having him in the editing room. You know, we weren't making a Bruce Springsteen biopic. We were making a movie about a man going through some really rough stuff who happens to be Bruce Springsteen. Yeah. And I know for him, this movie has done a lot for him and his family, sort of, I guess, making things go full circle.
Well, you know, staying on the subject of music, in Hamnet, you have that beautiful piece of music towards the end of the movie.
On A Nature of Daylight.
That's it. Was that there from the beginning, or?
Yeah, it's actually, Chloe likes to play music on the set. And this is, they were about to shoot the end of the film, like the play, the Hamlet. And she felt like she didn't know how to end the film. She didn't know how to, there was something missing. On the way to the set, Jesse Buckley sent it to her, that Max Richter piece on The Nature of Daylight. But the cool thing is Max was actually touring at that time. Like when we were cutting the film, he was touring. But he would come to his place in the Cotswolds, and he would call Chloe. He's like, okay, I'm here for 2 weeks. Let me work on it. So he would keep sending us. So we barely had tempted because basically the music we used, it was his music. And he'd give us something, he'd send something, then me and Chloe would sit and listen, and then immediately call Max. He's like, we like this, we don't like that. And through the whole time, he kept saying, I can try to replace on The Nature of Daylight. Let me try. And he did many times. And then we put it in, it just doesn't have the same feeling. And Chloe's like, it doesn't matter. I don't care that this has been used before. It just works so well. It was great to have him just constantly sending like new stuff. And we would adjust the cut to the music, like, oh, this is great, we can hold this.
You know, making this movie was very much organic in the sense that it's like walking into a room and admitting that you know nothing so that you can learn what it is and learn everything and let it speak to you. So with the music and stuff, you know, having known Ryan and Ludwig since film school, you know, we first worked together in 2010. You know, Ludwig's involved in the script phase. And as soon as he reads the script, he'll go out and research all over the world, whether it's in Africa for Panther or, you know, go to boxing gyms with Creed. And this one he had to learn blues. And so he traveled around, learned from blues artists. What's amazing about that is that I'll get either a suite or maybe 3 or 4 you know, pieces of music of just ideas for him. So I get to hear his audio story of how he's interpreting the movie and what he feels like it should be. And so, you know, in his first pass, we had Irish music and we had, you know, orchestral pieces. Then we had you know, some synth, and every musical piece on set was played and sang live in that space. And so feeling like you're in that juke with the pounding of the music and the reverbs of it, or even driving in a car, in an old noisy car with no roof. And so when they shot the big pieces, you know, for example, the Pale Pale Moon sequence, which is the time in the middle when, you know, Mary goes out to talk to the vampires, you see Remick jump up in the air, and then we cut inside to Perline jumping onto the stage and starting this song. You know, that was recorded as the length of the song, but scripted, there were several scenes within that whole structure that when I first cut it together, it was 4 times as long as the actual song was. So, you know, you got to find intercuts, and Ryan said, hey, can you take all this and just cut it to the length of the song? It was one of those situations where when you have parameters, it kind of gives you a little more freedom at times. I started to find, okay, well, she jumps up and down on stage, you know, with this big part in the movie, and there's a scene that was scripted a little bit different timing where guys are beating up this guy and kicking him in the back. And I said, well, that's, you know, a party outside where people are stomping and a thing in the back room where people are stomping, that makes sense to go together. So how do I, you know, work all this together? And then, you know, when Perline was on the stage and she does this kind of creepy dance and crawls around and, you know, leans back, I line that up with Mary and Stack in the back room where we've already set up that you're pretty sure she's a vampire and he's in trouble. And so going back and forth and keeping, you know, matching these moments spiritually and the tone of them was sort of how we led it. And then we would talk to Ludwig and I'd say, hey, can I do this, you know, with the music and the timing of the song? Because I don't want to ruin what you've done. What you've done is so beautiful and is such a, you know, a big part of this movie. And he would just say, yeah, can you put in maybe like 17 more frames and I can finish this phrase and we can make this work. So it was a constant collaboration. Rocky wrote to Dublin, the Irish jig outside with all the vampires, which is so much fun. Does that move the story along? No. But it's vampires doing an Irish jig outside of a juke in the 1930s. Like, let's go, you know?
You know, Luke, again, I know your film is like largely found footage stuff, but like, what are you doing with sound to sort of like add this total other dimension to it?
Yeah, everything. Yeah, it's as important as the picture, the process of the sound design, you know, and that's part of the process, you know, working with Khalil over the years that we've developed together that we love and enjoy. And we love pushing the limits of, you know, I work in Premiere, adding reverbs on reverbs on reverbs on reverbs and trying to abstract sound and play with it just like we're playing with the picture as much as possible. And in this, we had a score by Klein, amazing musician who was feeding us stuff throughout the process. And then as far as music goes, it also can come from anywhere. There's like a section of the film that was one of the earlier pieces to kind of take form that we call the techno edit. After spending a couple of weeks on a very narrative section of the film and just getting to know the footage and trying to kind of imagine what any kind of narrative footage could work within a Khalil Joseph movie, which hadn't really been something that he had done before. His work in the process of editing, like anything that looked like a traditional edit, even a cut, he would reject, and just inherently. So trying to understand kind of what scripted narrative would look like kind of was a big challenge. And I remember spending a couple of weeks with this footage that was shot in Ghana, and I just picked a piece of techno music and did a freestyle kind of very just like, you know, from the stream of conscious edit that ended up becoming a cornerstone kind of a certain section of the movie. It kind of just all kind of came out at once. And then, you know, that techno piece just happened to be on a playlist I had from music that I was listening to. And, you know, that's how that entered the movie.
Well, I'm thinking about found footage, and there's sort of an archival footage aspect to your film with Dead Man's Wire.
It wasn't intended initially, but I had a bunch of footage from a documentary, and I had the raw footage from the news networks. And a lot of times I looked at Bill Skarsgård's performance and I was like, I think it's like a bit over the top. And then I would examine the actual original footage and I realized that he was playing it really low key because the real guy was out of his mind. But when I started digging through that stuff, I found a lot of really interesting, weird 70s news stuff, Indianapolis. Talked to Gus about it a little bit. I was like, can we use this stuff? And I wanted to use a little bit of it, not a lot. Gus was like, yeah, we should use all of it. And I said, but we don't have like the rights to it, Gus, and we're a pretty small film. And he was like, oh, don't worry about it. We'll figure it out later. And then we just started building in that, and we found so much like humor. And then started putting little beautiful things that you don't even know, like in the press conference, where I do cut to the hands of the real guy, and started playing. It's such a playful little thing to be able to do that, to use a stock. And because it was shot the same way, It was incredibly useful for exposition because people needed to know like how many days and what happened and about Tony's grievance with the bank, about the land, and that I just found the actual stock footage. We were able to do the exposition with real footage, so it didn't feel like exposition, which is interesting as well because, you know, initially I just used all the Ikegamis. We used these 1977 cameras, you know, because I thought that's authentic. It's just going to be that. But eventually that kind of felt a little bit manipulated. The most challenging part was finding the balance between the news footage and the actual real footage that we shot to kind of go back and forth and create a narrative with that.
Now, what you were saying about Bill Skarsgård's performance kind of leads me to a question that I want to ask you, but then I want to kind of open it up to everybody else. How much, as an editor, do you feel like you are being kind of guided by what the actors are doing, and how much are you guiding the performances?
I think you're guided by them. And if you have a great performance, you just follow it. I used to work with Malik, and Malik once told me, like, if you work with a great actor, it's like you're skiing behind a powerful boat. Just hold on. And that's, I think, all you really got to do. You got to just follow them, and you have to find the right performance because a lot of actors give you a lot of different, options, but I think you always follow the actor, for me at least,
It's reactionary to them. Yeah. The whole thing's reactionary. You build around them.
In terms of the real-time aspect of House of Dynamite, when we look at the 18 or 19 minutes, is it actually 18 or 19 minutes? I wasn't looking at my watch.
No, it's a movie, 18 minutes.
Uh-huh.
But I stay really strict when time's unfolding in front of you. When, like, this is occurring in, 20 seconds, it takes 20 seconds. And then when you repeat that exact thing, then it's repeated the same way because I'm using the same bits of dialogue as as almost like a metronome. As long as it felt correct, it didn't matter to any of us if it was 10 seconds off, 30 seconds off, as long as it felt correct. So we weren't going to make the movie worse to be exact. I haven't put a timer to it. Maybe someone is going to out there.
They will.
Yeah.
Was there ever discussion of using the same line readings or different line readings for different things? And I always wonder about that, because there's the reality and that, like, objective truth or subjective truth,
There was, because I came on when she'd finished shooting. It's the first movie I've ever got to edit in story order. And that is a gift to any film editor, to be able to just watch your movie get made from start to finish, not have to start at the end and go to the front. So that part of it was just exciting, and you kind of wanted to gallop through it. And Catherine was so excited to show me what the next thing was. And there was all of this sort of like childlike enthusiasm to build it. And when I started to do a lot of that intricate work of, what was happening on the monitor, like fiddly stuff, and I guess the energy of the room slowed down, I sort of inherently knew to get to that later because I didn't want to lose the sort of, the electricity of us making the movie. And then when we'd finished the movie, the first pass of it, Catherine loved it. And I was like, okay, well, now I didn't even verbalize it. I was like, now I'm going to make sure that, the performance that we see in person at the end is the performance that we hear down here. And I just came in on the Monday morning and I started doing all that work. And Catherine was like, what are you doing? At the point when she kind of thought I liked this movie, she was good with the feeling. The impression was correct. I think it's an editor's neuroses to then do all of the rest.
That actually raises an interesting question. Aside from just the fact that it's, you probably have you're given a deadline or a release date or whatever. Like, how do you know when to stop? Like, how do you know when the movie is done? When you've got it?
What's that? They're never done, just abandoned.
To me, what happens is you keep cutting. There's like this cut version, then you watch the next one and it's worse, and it keeps getting worse. And be like, oh wait, 2 weeks ago we had locked this picture. We just didn't know. It just kept going. That's the experience I've had. Like, more often than not, be like, it was done. We just didn't know. We just kept trying.
It's interesting what you were saying about Catherine, because with Gus in this one, I showed him a cut early on. He was like, yeah, I like it. It's great. And I was like, well, we need to just do all these things. And he was sort of like, why? Like, he didn't want to over refine anything. I think there was like an energy and things being kind of rough. And I'm always like, to make something look bad, you got to spend a lot of time. You can't just be a mistake. You've got to kind of work it. But I think he really wanted to preserve a little bit of the energy that you get when something is a little bit off and a little bit crooked. And I've had, I wouldn't call it battles, but discussions with directors about that, because a lot of directors I feel really love that. At least the ones that I've worked with, and the neuroses of the editor is like, I'm going to make it a mistake, but purposefully, In that case, he was just like, no, we're done. we'll tweak it a little bit. And it was like a beautiful thing. And then it was also those producers saying, you're done. Like, we're out of money.
When do you know you finished a Terrence Malick movie?
It's like a setup for a joke.
I do believe that some films are overworked and too polished, and you lose the sort of the unknown quality of the original idea and the spark that you kind of had.
Yeah, the job is to get them, your director, to love their movie and to like their film. When they've reached that place of feeling that it's honest, and then it's it's hard to move it.
But there's a thing about, like, I think when you edit, like you're editing a lot for other editors in a way. You're editing for everybody else, but there's little details and little nuances that only other people that you work with will appreciate. It's kind of like being a musician. And there's some things that you do that most people won't care about.
Well, it's a gut feeling. It's a gut feeling of something is out of tune, because everything we do is musical. Dialogue is musical. That's how a large part of how we judge performances too. And so, when there's like one note out of tune and something's a little off, I always kind of, when we finally have time for that stuff, I say, this one take has always bothered me. Like, let's just go back. And when you're done, when you've sort of exhausted all of those little bugaboos, you have all those little things that are off key or out of tune for you and for the director. And I think it just sort of reveals itself of like, now it's time to put our pencils down. It just feels like the right time. And you can kind of walk away and say, this feels like the best version.
Yeah. What you're saying about a gut feeling is interesting, because I think with our experiences with other movies and watching other movies and understanding the language and how things should feel, editors kind of know how a movie should be, but we just not consciously. Like, we don't know, cut to this shot, to this shot, to this shot, or this timing, but there's something inside that once it hits it, you're like, you just relax. And, when we're in pixel lock mode, it's like our guts telling us, like, I don't know if you all experience this, but like when you're one step closer, you have like maybe 10 cuts left in the movie you got to do. Once you hit that one, it's like, oh, I'm a little excited now. And then, because, we're the first audience, right? And so we sort of have to reverse engineer what that whole audience, the emotional blueprint, the journey we want them to go through. It's something that I've always wished, I wish I could quantify. Like, if I could sit down and I knew exactly where to be, I'd cut the movie in 2 days, But there is an experience to it. And even doing a cut and leaving a scene and going and not watching that for a couple of weeks, the movie doesn't change, but we change. And it changes our perspective on what these moments are and what they mean, for the movie. So, it's something you can't really grab onto, that we're constantly trying to do.
Don't you think that's part of the hardest part, is remembering that first electric feeling that you have when you watch dailies, and then having to go through it for a year with structural changes and notes and stuff like that, and just keep going back? No, that's what I felt at that point. And protect that. That, I think, is just such a difficult thing to do. It's so important.
Bring a person you respect into the room to watch it, and then you'll see all the things that are shitty. Like, they don't need to say anything, but you watch it through them going,
all this talk about precision and everything. There's a specific scene I want to ask you about, Andy, because one of my favorite scenes in any movie this year is the DNA testing scene in One Battle After Another. And that felt to me, like, when I was watching it, I felt like that was perfect.
The scene's a lot longer, the way it was shot. In fact, there's a line that Lockjaw said after he first started the test, and he walked over to the bench. He's like, "This is going to take 30 minutes." And we knew we had to cut that line out, because you're sat far into the movie and you're like, okay, we cannot telegraph to the audience that this is going to be a 30-minute scene. And then actually, we also didn't have music for a while. And it's like, there's a very low kind of percussive thing that Johnny ended up writing for that scene. It's almost like a ticking clock. And there are these like little notes that are like accenting some of the jokes and some of the dramatic moments. So and it just was just fine tuning till it was perfect. One thing I was going to say, kind of as the antithesis of what other people are saying about the perfect cuts. Sometimes Paul will say to me, he's like, that cut's too perfect. And kind of challenging me, it opens up other opportunities, or you just, maybe you leave in some little mistake or something. There's just like a humanity to a scene because it's not perfect. We don't do split screens, we don't do speed effects or anything like that. We just try to make it work through the cuts. And sometimes just leaving some of these like little mistakes in, it gives you something.
You know, like for me, one of my favorite parts of which I would love to kind of hear about your process. The road, man. Yeah. Like, I mean, it's just a road, but it's playing with lenses and movement and timing and the suspense that you're kind of building. And like, you're clearly effectively evoking a lot of emotion.
You know, there was a lot of footage. You know, we shot from all the different perspectives. So it really was just like, I made selects. I was just choosing the best things. It was really long for the longest time. And actually sending it to the sound department early helped a lot. We could kind of give each of the cars like their own sound, like as their own character. So even though it was really long, then I could just take that really long sequence and chop it up and still use their stems to kind of still have that same feeling. The layering on that sort of orchestra sound going like up and down over some of the different hill sounds. So it's just fine-tuning till the very last day of the mix.
And was the POV aspect of it, was that sort of designed from the beginning, or was that kind of found in the edit?
It was part of the design. Yeah. In fact, when Paul was like first trying to figure it out, I think they kind of figured this out when they were doing their scout, and he just took his iPhone and was like zoomed in and kind of got the idea that if you attached a camera and zoomed in, you could get these kind of like ups and downs. Took a lot of work, but that's the kind of thing where you just really have to go through every single shot to find the best stuff.
How long did you work on that scene? Like a couple of months?
I mean, ultimately, yes. You know, we all have that thing where you're just like sitting in the theater and you're just seeing when people are leaning forward and seeing, okay, when does it feel too long at that point? You know, we also wanted to make sure that it kind of gave you that little bit of a sense of motion sickness, but you didn't go past the line. It had to be right to that line.
Did you test that with different types of people? And
basically, I sat in front of our big projector that we have, like this close to the screen, and just like kind of gave myself a fake IMAX experience.
Yeah, I saw that IMAX a lot.
Well, they're all great, and I was just so impressed by your work, and I really appreciate all of you taking the time to come and talk with me about it. This has been great. So
thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.